Welcome to Off Script with Dan Dwyer on Robin Hood Radio, featuring in-depth interviews with guests from the world of theater and allied arts. Underwriting support from Johnny Cake Books in Salisbury, Connecticut, whose collection of rare collectible and out-of-print books is housed in a 19th century cottage in one of the most old-fashioned small towns in New England. And now, here's the host of Off Script, Dan Dwyer.
Well, thank you, Marshall, and welcome to Off Script. Robin Hood Radio listening area has yet another new theater company to add to the region's cultural wealth. It's called Barrington Public Theater, and it is having its inaugural production called Breakwater, now at the theater at Simon's Rock on the Bard campus in Great Barrington. My guest today is not only one of the founders of Barrington Public Theater, but also the author of the play, Breakwater. With me in the studio today is Jim Frangione, who is here to talk about the new theater and his new play. Jim's an actor, director, and playwright, and has worked not only in New York theater, but also in major regional theaters across the country. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, you've spent a career, actor, director, playwright. We've also learned you read a lot of books. Right. So I guess the first question that I have, let's talk about the new theater. How did the Barrington Public Theater come about?
We were in Great Barrington. I was part of the Berkshire Playwrights Lab for the past 10 years, a new play development forum. And I wanted to start doing productions, workshops and full productions. And the group was doing staged readings at the Mahawi, which I think were wonderful, and the playwrights really get a great benefit from them. But what I was hearing from my playwright friends was, we want productions. We want, we've done readings. We keep doing readings, and we love them, but we want to do more. We want a theater to give us a production. So that was the kind of the genesis of it all. And I have a couple of great partners who are of the same mind, and so that was the feeling, and we were able to do that.
Right. Now, is the old Aglet, the new Aglet, involved in this at all? So I've heard some scuttlebutt about something or other.
We really formed out of the bones of Aglet. Uh-huh. Aglet, Macy and Gloria and everybody, Tom, we're getting to the point where it was becoming a lot. Running a theater is difficult. And so Deanne Halper and myself, Deanne had been involved with Aglet for many years, decided, well, let's ask if we can maybe, rather than filing new for a 501c3 nonprofit, why don't we take over Aglet when they retire, and then let's see if we can't just restructure it and reorganize it and reconstitute it as Barrington Public Theater, which is exactly what we did.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. But funding is still the issue, and it's a really, really competitive environment out there.
Yeah.
Because everybody's always begging for everything, not just theater, but the dance companies, the the music companies, all of it. So what's that struggle like?
Well, I think theater, there are so many great and worthy arts groups up here, especially up in South County and in the Berkshires in Massachusetts, with theater and dance and Berkshire Theater Festival and Barrington and all those, Tanglewood. But I've always felt that theater begets more theater. So the more theater is, we're trying to create a kind of a theater row, a theater district in Great Barrington, where theater kind of thrives. And I think people appreciate it. I know the local residents of Northwest Connecticut and upstate New York and Massachusetts are looking for something in their area rather than going up north to Williamstown or Pittsfield or et cetera. So we've had great luck so far. People have really supported it and have come out in droves to see the play and help support the new theater.
I went to see Breakwater last Sunday afternoon, pouring rain as we all arrived at the theater. I must say I've never been to the Art Center, they call it, at the Bard campus of Simon's Rock, and I was really impressed with the facility. But it was a curious thing when I walked into the theater. You had the two side sections of the theater roped off, and you made this for people who are interested in the inside baseball of theater management. You made an interesting announcement why those sections were cut off.
So under the agreement with Actors Equity Association, which is the union of professional actors and stage managers, of which our group, most of our group is a member, our stage manager, 3 of our 5 actors are members of Equity. I've been a member of Equity for 35 years. This is the developing theater contract under which we work limits us to 99 seats. So we have 99 seat maximum, and we keep that center section of the theater. We're hoping to up that contract next year and very soon, so we can sell the whole theater. But it works great for us because it allows us to work with the actors without a lot of the pension and health contributions, and it makes it much more affordable for the producing organization to do it.
Talk about affordable. I'm just curious. I saw the play, as I said, and you effectively use a minimum of props to suggest time and place. And to move the scenes from one to another, all the obligatory stuff. But I'm curious, how much does it cost to put on that kind of a production?
It costs. We find that the ticket price. We want to keep our tickets affordable. The tickets, I think, are $28 for our production, which is pretty affordable. Mm-hmm. And if you know a little deal, you can get a little less. But I think that the limited nature of the set design. Of course, there's a taxi. There's wonderful soundscape. There's the lighting. There's a minimal set design, which is my idea of how a new play should be produced. You don't want to walk in and see a big unit set that is a living room and a house and so forth. We're all about the text and the words. We want people to hear the play. You see a full production. Mm-hmm. But I think it helps in cutting back some of the cost of the play, and ultimately the ticket prices can stay affordable.
Good. In case you just joined us, the program is Off Script. My guest today is Jim Frangione. He's one of the founding partners of the new Barrington Public Theater, and he's the author of its inaugural production, Breakwater, which I'm going to talk about now.
Great.
Did I get this right? Someplace I've read, I think, that it's part of a trilogy that you've written?
Right.
Is that the case?
That is the
So either set up Breakwater and give us an idea of what it's about, or put it in the context of the trilogy that you've written.
Well, I'm born and raised on Cape Cod. And
I should add, I'm a native of New Bedford.
Oh, New Bedford. Get out of here. Sure. Yeah, well, Cape Cod.
What town on Cape Cod?
I'm Hyannis. I'm from Hyannis.
Of course.
So JFK is a character in the play. And
when I was a kid, speaking of JFK, I'm old enough that I remember my parents putting us in the car, and we went down and stood on the rope line at Otis Air Force Base and saw Air Force One come down, and actually Kennedy came over and he shook our hand and said hello, and I'll never forget it.
He probably got on a helicopter then and went right to Hyannis.
I can't remember that part.
I think he did.
Was it a chopper? Probably It was, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In fact, I used to go, when I was a child, I used to go over and watch him land over in Hyannisport.
In Hyannisport
at the
itself.
compound.
Yeah,
sure. I'm
great.
old enough to know. I actually had a couple of encounters with JFK when I was 5 and 6 years old. That's how old I am.
Well, that informs what you've written. So let's get back to the play.
Sure. So the play takes place on the Cape, and it's one of a trilogy of plays. I'm working on the third play now. And
this was the second?
This was the second in the trilogy.
The first one is?
The first one is called Flight of the Monarch. It's a two-character play about a brother and a sister. She's facing some cognitive deficits, and he's a fishing boat captain, and they're kind of a hardscrabble family. It's a dark comedy, much like Breakwater is in a way. But the Cape, and all the seashells and seaweed and sand are kind of been banging around in my head for all these years, and it's very evocative to me, and I like to write about it. I love characters and dialect and voices, and this play's full of all that.
Mm-hmm. So what are the principal characters in Breakwater?
So the story really is about the central theme of the story is a young woman who's late 20s is driving a taxi, and she's searching for her biological father. And the story between her mother and she is the central one in the story. Why she's never been able to get the information about who her father is, where the DNA is, and how come her mother's never told her. And JFK appears to her. She conjures him, and I don't want to give too much away.
No.
He helps her he helps JFK, the ghost of JFK comes back to help guide her in her quest for her, who she is.
And let me just say, it's interesting what you do with that as much as it is interesting what you don't do with that. Mm-hmm. Is that giving too much away?
No, absolutely not.
Thank you. But you know what I mean.
Of course.
Good.
Yes.
The thing that impressed me about the play is it takes place in real time, but then, as you say, you've got the visitation by JFK.
Right.
And that's sort of in a different time. or from a different place. That's fair enough to say?
Sure.
Okay.
The play takes place in 1990. And then we go back. We see JFK when he was in his prime in 1960, 62 in the election of 60.
Right, but there were also these, and we don't have to get into which character or characters this occurs to, but there are imaginative flights, discussions that may or may not be for real, which adds kind of interesting dimension to it. It's not all, shall we say, perfectly literal, is it?
Well, I think Kennedy was he loved poetry. Mm-hmm. And so when you see JFK, he comes out and he speaks to the audience, but he recites some poetry. Of course, he was a big fan of Frost and others, and I wanted to make him create a kind of a mythical, poetical figure. And I think it's how we all remember him, the inspiring rhetoric of JFK. And I know that I certainly miss that kind of inspiring rhetoric today.
Mm-hmm. Let's go talk about JFK a little bit, because we both, being from that neck of the woods, you more precisely than I, grew up in a household that was not necessarily politically active, but was definitively Democratic. Okay?
Yes.
All right. And we have, and Kennedy did conjure Camelot and still does. But we also know an awful lot about the personal life now of John F. Kennedy, and we don't have to go through the litany of what used to be just in tabloid magazines. It's all been pretty much documented and known. So how do we now rationalize that?
I think, what we try to do in the play is present him as a fallible human being and someone who had his foibles and had his problems and his issues, and certainly women were his Achilles heel in many ways. Whether it's Judith Exner or Marilyn or Inga Binga, whoever it was, there were stories abounding about Kennedy, and many of them have proven to be true. I've read a lot about JFK over the years. Robert Dallek's great book, An Unfinished Life, is more the definitive book on Kennedy, and he touches on a lot of that. He was a war hero. And at a very young age, his older brother, Joe Kennedy, was killed in action in World War II. He was blown up in a plane trying to fly a plane full of explosives into the coast of France. And when JFK's older brother, Joe, was killed, the father, Joe Kennedy Sr., looked to Jack Kennedy as the young one coming out of Harvard, and he had just been a naval hero, saving his crew in PT-109 that was rammed in the sea off the in the South Asian Sea, and it was rammed in the middle of the night by a big Japanese destroyer, and his men swam for all night to end up in a little island, a grassy kind of knoll of islands. Mm-hmm. And Kennedy pulled a couple of them with him. One fellow who was badly injured, he put on his back and literally swam, for hours with him. And he was instrumental in their rescue as well. So he was a legitimate hero. He never wanted the spotlight in terms of that. And I think from what I've read about JFK, he never really wanted to be president and was almost pushed into it by his father, a very domineering father who was made his money in not only bootlegging, but prior to that in the film business out in Los Angeles. I think, and
had his own history.
That's right. I mean, he was the K in RKO cinemas, in RKO studios. So a complicated, complex family. Of course, the brothers as well, which we talk a little bit about. But he was a mythical and a romantic figure, certainly to those of us who remember him, and I think even to those who don't remember him personally, but who read about him. He was a figure who enchanted us all.
Yeah. All of which you now describe, some of the detail is all there in Breakwater, pretty much. In fact, there's we don't have to get into how Judith Exner's name works into the play, but it comes from an unexpected source, let's say, in the play. And, of course, for people who don't have the political memory as you and I do, we should say that Judith Exner was the woman who shared a lover in both John Kennedy, the President of the United States, and Sam Giancana.
That's right.
One of the major mafia figures in the country. So there is a lot there to work with. Having grown up in Massachusetts about the same time as you, I obviously with the last name Dwyer in an Irish-American household. You with Frangione, I assume.
Half Irish,
half Italian-American, right? Okay. Typical Boston, New England hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I was always aware of being Irish Catholic, as you probably were being half Irish, half Italian Catholic.
Yeah, sure.
And you have a character putting the Kennedys aside because they were definitively Irish Catholic, even though they commerced in the world of WASP. You have a character in your play that is decidedly WASP and above all else. And you also have a character in the major woman character in the play who works in a bar, drives a cab, who's definitively blue collar. All of this, to me at least, goes back to these types that I grew up with.
Sure.
Same for you?
Well, if you remember when we were kids, I remember Cape Cod, and as was the case, I'm sure, in New Bedford. Certainly Cape Cod. It was a sandbar. There was nobody there.
In the winter,
when I was kids.
Yeah.
Certainly in the winter, but even in the summer people would come, but it was nothing like it is today.
Right.
I go back, and my dad was a builder, and I remember the backhoe operators and the plumbers and the electricians and their voices, and people would say things like, well, the horses, I'm going over to put the horses out in the barn. And all those voices are rattling around.
Then we'll go down to the bar and have some narries.
Of course. But Cape Cod, the old Cape Cod that I remember of JFK in my childhood, in my single digits and early teenage years, was a much different place than it is today, and that's the Cape Cod that I write about.
Right. What about the WASP? Talk about that. I mean, the older woman in the play is rather waspy.
The mom.
Yeah.
The mom, you're talking about or Tippy.
The one who's driven to the bar every night to
Tippy Dempsey.
Yes,
she
exactly.
represents an older faction on Cape Cod. There weren't many Italians or Irish on Cape Cod.
No.
I think the stories.
They were in the factory cities.
That's
still.
Right.
Yeah.
I grew up in a big Irish-Italian family, went to Catholic church, as long as I was able. And you had that great Irish Kennedy was part of that. He really opened the door, certainly in the presidential race. There had never been a Catholic running for president.
It was
a huge deal for him.
Yeah.
And especially in some of the Midwest states, I think in the East Coast states, it was a little more easy for him. But Cape Cod was a kind of a microcosm of that. There weren't many ethnic groups on Cape Cod until the 40s and the 50s after the war. My dad, my dad was born in New York City, and joined the Coast Guard, which brought him to Cape Cod, and then he went off to in the war. Back then, the Coast Guardsmen ran the landing boats and so forth. And then I think after the war, a lot of the guys settled back on Cape Cod, and that was the beginning of the wave, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
A practical question: limited a run for Breakwater. I think we've got 3 performances left.
Right. Tomorrow at 7. Tonight and tomorrow at 7:30, and then Sunday at 2 p.m. is our closing show.
Okay, great. In case you're just joining us, the program Off Script. My guest, as you are hearing, is Jim Frangione. He's one of the founders of the new Barrington Public Theater and the author of Breakwater, which can be seen this weekend in 3 performances, as Jim just mentioned, up at Simon's Rock Theater on the Bart campus in Great Barrington. The thing that I also was distinctive about the précis that you write about in the program, about the mission of Barrington Stage Company, and also seeing Breakwater, is that it was cast with mostly local and
all local
regional
actors.
So let's talk about that and how these specific roles were cast.
We have a great wealth of our talent pool up here is very rich in Northwest Connecticut, and as well as in the Berkshires and upstate New York. There are just a lot of really terrific professional actors up here, and we try to reach out and use all our local resources, and that's the mission really of our group, is to act local. That is our kind of motto. And I think that resonates, with a lot of people. A lot of the other theaters job in actors and bring them in from New York and elsewhere, and that's great because there's a lot of terrific actors out there. But we have a different mission. We want to work with our local playwrights, and there are terrific local playwrights, area playwrights. Some of them are part of Barrington Public Theater. And I also just did the theater at Bard College at Simon's Rock, that complex, the Daniel Arts Center, is an absolutely beautiful facility, and we are just so thrilled to be there. We just found out that we'll be there again next summer for hopefully expand our programming a little bit and establish ourselves. Starting a new theater company is hard, to build a mailing list and database and reach out to new audiences. So we're thrilled about all of it.
The casting for Breakwater, did all of those actors do the workshop reading you had?
Most of them?
Most of them,
with one or two exceptions. The 5 actors, I think 3 of them were in the initial developmental readings of it. And then we found a terrific young actress, Rhea Malcolm, who's the lead in the play. She's actually from the Troy area, Troy, New York.
Right.
And she is fabulous to watch in this play.
She's really good. She, you believe she is who she is in
really
the play.
Right,
I mean, she's got that kind of working class, wise ass quality that is that really carries through the whole play. You didn't direct this, which I think is a wise idea. And I guess we could, because you've been obviously the actor, the director, and the playwright before. Why some playwrights do make a mistake in insisting they get to direct their work. Why were you wise enough not to do that?
Well, I knew, I had directed a play in the spring up at Shakespeare and Company called Lady Randy, which was a new play by Anne Underland about Jenny Jerome, who was Winston Churchill's mother. It was a two-hander. And I felt like after that play had opened and, I had given birth to a couple of bowling balls. And coming on the heels of that.
You say as an Irish, Italian, American male, right? Thank you very much.
But I felt like we had a wonderful director in Kelly Galvin who had worked on the developmental readings of it, and she is just fabulous. Yeah. And it allowed me as the playwright to work on the revisions, of which there were several, new pages coming in every week with the actors and new lines to learn, excise some lines, and really just rework the script. And when you have really good actors, you can do that. But the director really, Kelly shaped the play. She worked with our sound designer and our set designer and our costume designer, and really created a wonderful environment for the play. And that's all great. And you directing a new play and writing a new play at the same time is tough.
Yeah. But you've directed before and you've acted before a lot, so I can see if you're a director with actors' experience and insight, how you can relate to, create the environment for, if you have to direct an actor to get through a scene. But as an actor, what do you deal with the situation when you know better than the director that's been assigned to direct you?
Well, it's always tough. I think, it's a friend of mine. And directing a play, actors you find how to find the right actors for the right part. I always say to actors when I teach, I always say, we're not looking for anybody but you in this part. We want you to be you. We don't want you to become somebody else. We just want you to be you. And once actors understand that they want to bring as much of themselves to the role, their performances really are much better, and we see who they are inside. But I have been fortunate over the years in my acting career, and I've worked as a professional actor for 35 years. I've worked most notably with David Mamet. I've done a lot of his plays in New York and all over across the country, and I've done 5 or 6 films with him. And his, it was always very simple with him. Just say the words, and not that it's just as simple as that, but to pull back from the artifice of acting and really just let the words come out.
There's no doubt about you brought his name up. There's no doubt about his contribution to American theater. But what happened to him politically? Where did he go off the deep end?
He's taken a little bit of a right turn these days, and I think some of his plays reflect that. I still love Dave. We're old friends, and I wish I could make an announcement today that we're going to be doing a brand new play of his next summer, the world premiere, but I can't say that right now on the radio.
Okay.
But, he's an old friend and a great supporter, and I love his work, especially some of the older work, American Buffalo, Glengarry, all those great pieces. He just had a play that opened in London right now called Bitter Wheat with John Malkovich playing kind of a Harvey Weinstein character. And it's been a little bit of a rocky road, the reviews on that play over there. But he's a terrific writer, but politically I think has taken a little bit of a turn. He's an iconoclastic figure, and I'm still trying to figure it all out.
One last question. Besides the acting, besides the directing, besides the playwriting, you also narrate books, 300 of them?
Oh, at least 300 audiobooks.
So what do you do? First, two questions, briefly. Do you always fully read the book before you read the book for taping or recording? And number two, what do you do if you really don't like the book?
I try to read all the books that I narrate ahead of time. I try to prep the book before I get into the studio with it. I do a lot of romance. All the audiobook narrators do, and I'm one of many who work a lot, do a lot of these books. I do a lot of romance books. I do a lot of big vampire thrillers. I seem to have a great face for audio, so that's fine with me. I do try to prep the book ahead of time. My favorite series that I do is a series called the Chet and Bernie Mysteries, and it's about a private detective down in the Southwest who goes on these great adventures, and the stories are told by his dog Chet. And I know it sounds corny, but they're brilliant, and they are funny, and I love them.
And you have a good dog voice.
And I have a good dog voice.
Great.
Well, Chet is me, so
Good.
I am Chet.
Jim Frangione, thank you for coming on Off Script.
Thank you for having
me. The
me.
new theater company, Barrington Public Theater, and its first inaugural production written by Jim Frangione is Breakwater, which you can see this weekend at the Simons Rock campus in Great Barrington. Thank you for joining Off Script. Until the next time you tune in, thanks for listening, and be well.
Underwriting support for Off Script with Dan Dwyer from Johnny Cake Books in Salisbury, Connecticut, whose collection of rare, collectible, and out-of-print books is housed in a 19th century cottage in one of the most old-fashioned small towns in New England. Off Script with Dan Dwyer is also available via podcast on our on-demand page, robinhoodradio.com. Click on On Demand, and then click on Off Script with Dan Dwyer.